Hi everyone, welcome to my talk through African perspectives for UNISA psychology. If it's helpful, click like, share and subscribe. This is very oversimplified and we're just going through it for the exams. It's actually a very interesting, rich, complex field, but we can't go into it all now, okay? All right. So psychology is from the West and therefore excluded African perspectives. We had to draw on, in the beginning of brings an African perspective into psychology on anthropology, philosophy, and theology. Okay, and some people did do research on African subjects, but it was from a Western perspective, measuring intelligence, self-concept, personality, and attitudes. In the 1960s and 70s, there was the Black is Beautiful political movement, okay? And so that started to bring in Afrocentric ideas, but it was still very much an American field. African universities have generally not prioritized psychology across the continent. Yeah, the questions, the answers will eventually, I'll come back and put links to the answers in. Obstacles to developing an African perspective in personology. Okay, psychology was originally blatantly racist. Western thought was standardly racist for quite a long time. And psychology has also been quite elitist because it's been by the rich and for the rich, which means also by the white people and for the white people, with a few exceptions like Fanon. And so when it has paid attention to people who aren't white and rich, it's often been totally off the mark, okay? And therefore hasn't been able to be very helpful. Western psychologists don't accurately portray African life, so their bodies of knowledge may not be appropriate or applicable. The racism implicit in Western psychology has at times been pretty horrific. If you click on this link, you can go and read an article about it and what they were planning to do and some of the experiments that were actually carried out with great cruelty against Black people. Okay. Right, the transitionary phase. Okay, so for centuries, a lot of Africa has been in the phase of transition from traditional to modern, okay? And so we still have all three. Some people are still living very traditionally. Others are shuttling between, like the village and the city, one lifestyle and another. And some people are quite modern. They're living an industrial and post-industrial lifestyle, which is Western. But such people still have roots in tradition and still go back to tradition for their social rituals and rites of passage often, okay? And still take pride in those traditional roots. Okay, but is there really an African perspective? It's a huge geographical area from sub-Saharan Africa to South Africa with the tropical desert and the jungle in the middle. So a huge difference in geography, language groups, history, culture, and genetic makeup, okay? But there is an argument to be made that there is actually an overarching African perspective and that these cultures have unity in spirituality, representation, expression through art and behavior, and their set of principles deriving from their myths and collective rituals, archetypes that are specific to Africa. So why do we need an African perspective on indigenous psychology? All right, if we see everybody through Western concepts, that really is a form of scientific colonialism. To understand people, we truly need to listen to them and meet them where they are. And so we need a psychology that can do this for African people, okay? We come from vastly different mythological roots. In the West, we have myths that go back thousands of years to the ancient Greeks and the Romans, and also through Christianity and the Nordic traditions. And in Africa, there are different myths, different archetypes, different points of reference, different ways of understanding reality and the self. Okay. So by understanding these differences, we can enrich our understanding of people who are from Africa and also of humanity in general and our potential and variability. All right. So the view of the person and worldview, this is important for exams. We've got 3 things to remember. 1, it's holistic. In other words, everything is part of a whole, including God, nature, and people. 2, it's anthropocentric. In other words, the center of everything is humans. The point of reference for everything is humans. Okay? And everything belongs together and is interconnected. According to Sao, there are 3 cosmic orders of reality. The macrocosmos. This is the realm of God. God has withdrawn from and transcended the human realm, so that ancestors connect us to God because God is so far above and higher. But at the same time, the macrocosmos is interwoven with day-to-day life. Spirituality and day-to-day life is interconnected. And it's collective. Religion is focused on a group process and a group experience rather than individuality. Okay, then we have the mesocosmos. The mesocosmos is between the macro and the microcosmos. And this is where the ancestors are. This is where malignant spirits live. This is where witchcraft and healing and shamanism are practiced. This is where coincidence lies, and this is where causality comes from. This is the area which determines whether you're going to be sick or well, prosperous or struggle, okay? And also whether you will live or die. Okay. It can be called, so the mesocosmos is also referred to as the structured collective imaginary, because it structures and determines the day-to-day life of people. Causality is not us and what we do, it is outside us in the mesocosmos. And we're part of a greater network. We are not operating in isolation. This also means that people are not responsible for their own behavior because it's caused by external supernatural beings and powers. Okay, and obviously as people modernize, they lose connection with the mesocosmos. All right, so there becomes this disjunction between the traditional and the modern, which is quite hard to negotiate. Having multicultural influences can be quite tricky. The microcosmos. This is where people live in day-to-day life, and it's governed by the principle of Ubuntu, and it's collective as well. All right, let's look at the difference between Western and African psychobehavioral modalities. In Africa, the emphasis is on the group and on similarity and commonality. In the West, it's individualized, okay, and with an emphasis on differences. These are our core value differences. Values and customs. Competitive in the West, based on individual rights, separateness and independence. In Africa, it's collective, it's cooperative. Responsibility is shared and also owed. So in that way, it's much more like the Eastern philosophy than the Western philosophy. In the West, it's survival of the fittest, and nature is to be controlled and dominated. In Africa, it's survival of the tribe, and people are one with nature. So the sense of self is collective. You are part of the group, and you are also part of a cosmos that includes God and nature. You are just one interwoven part of that, okay? And you're also part of time. In the past and the future, you are just one little participant. Cognitive functioning and the concept of time. In Africa, people use intuitive rationality, which incorporates emotions and intention as well as reason. Time is 2-dimensional, not 3-dimensional. In other words, the past is infinite And the present is important, but the future is still unformed. It does not really exist except in relation to the present. The present creates the future. Okay? Time is circular, not linear, and is ruled by nature. People create time, not act in a time that's objective, relative to them. Okay? And there's an external locus of control. The ancestors and the past determine the present and the future. Optimal development. Because traditional Africans live in a far more creative world, they are far more integrated. The left and the right hemispheres of the brain are more balanced and communicate better. Okay, there's a lot of validity to this because in the West, we go through this long period of education in which people are actively taught not to move, not to speak, not to dance, not to sing, and not to get creative, okay, except in very controlled ways. Most of education is about being rational and analytical, and so it vastly overdevelops the left brain, okay, and neglects the right brain and doesn't interconnect them. So in Africa, this isn't so. People use a lot more art and a lot more music. They're a lot more integrated, okay? And so they're a lot less stressed. They're also part of a collective, so they've got that group support. They're not operating in isolation, which can be very lonely, even for a Westerner, okay? So rhythm brings structure and coherence to the experience of life. It brings purpose, meaning, and connection to the inner self, the sacred, and the collective. Okay, so one possible interpretation is that African people don't suffer from that unconscious Freudian id constantly trying to break through into awareness and dominate the ego because they're already integrated with their ids because they never repressed them, okay? They're already integrated with their natural instincts and drives. Views in psychopathology. Health is about wholeness and integration, and disease is fragmentation and disintegration. Mind and body are intimately connected, not separated, so mental symptoms and physical symptoms are all wished up. A psychological problem can give rise to physical symptoms and vice versa. And it's also not necessarily as specific as it is for a Westerner. Okay? Causes of illness. Okay, a lot of stress is because of relationship problems, either with the community or with the spiritual world. So the causes of illness can be because of this stress and disharmony, especially with the ancestors. It could also be caused by witchcraft, evil spirits. If the ancestors wish you to become a shaman or sangoma, they may discipline you by making you ill until you comply with their wishes. So the cause of an illness for a traditional African healer is not what is causing this, but who is causing this, okay? Dreams are used to communicate directly with the ancestors and to receive very direct messages and insight and advice to bring back to the microcosmos, okay? And the ancestors are also able to speak directly with a person, just like we can speak to one another in everyday life. So a person that says they're hearing the ancestors or they are the victims of witchcraft is not necessarily schizophrenic or suffering a psychotic breakdown. This is completely in line with tradition, okay? And it's not abnormal. All right, in psychotherapy, in the African tradition, people use dance for healing along with music and drumming. They also use ritual and symbolic objects. So here's a picture of a traditional African healer. Okay. Right, now this is a long list. Let's run through it. African and Western, the differences. African, it's practical. Western, it's mainly Rogerian. So African is not just about talking, it's about doing. Whereas Western, it's talking. It's very verbal and cognitive and conceptual in the Western tradition. African is not necessarily private. It can be open, it can be in the public, it can be communal. In the West, it's very strictly private and confiding. African healers will tell the client what to do in order to get better. Western will facilitate the client choosing what they wish to do to get better. In the Western, they're working with the material, natural world. In the African, it's not only the material, natural world, but also the supernatural and the spiritual. In the West, the emphasis is on individual empowerment and individuation. In African, it's about social cohesion and making sure that things work for the group and the family. Okay, in the West, you tell your therapist why you have come. In Africa, your sangoma or healer or shaman will tell you why you have come. Often a lot more herbs and medicines and unity is used in Africa, whereas in the West only occasionally. Ritual is occasionally used in the West, but usually used in African tradition. Far looser boundaries. You can actually live in the same house as your healer. There's no restrictions on going to a healer like there are in the West. Okay. In the West, you often see your client's motivation as being unconscious. In African tradition, the client is conscious of what they need to work on. Dreams are direct communications from the ancestors in Africa. In the West, they're symbolic and intrapsychic. They reflect dynamics happening within the mind. Okay, personal values are built in if you're in the African tradition. In the West, you keep your opinions to yourself and act objectively. Okay. West mainly talking. Africa may use a lot of materials such as bones and intuition. And again, in the West, the focus is on what is happening. And in the African tradition, it's who caused this. Okay, so that is the end of that. Good luck for the exams. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, bye.